Picture this, you spend your life savings on a peaceful home with clean water and cleaner neighbors. Then one morning, a woman with a clipboard and a god complex reroutes your water line because your hedge felt aggressive. I didn't just lose my faucet, I discovered what happens when a Karen thinks she's the queen of utilities. And I'm the one who builds the kingdom. Trust me, this story doesn't end with me sitting quietly and taking it. Oh, and by the way, have you ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA president? Tell me where you're watching from and share your worst HOA horror story in the comments below. They say buying a home means achieving the American dream. Mine came with a mortgage, a lovely backyard. Me and a woman named Barbara Scholes who believed she was the reincarnation of General Patton, if Patton cared deeply about mulch alignment. The first week I moved into Maple Downs, I got a letter stating my mailbox was insufficiently neutral, toned, which I ignored because I thought it was a joke. But Barbara wasn't kidding. Barbara Scholes, show president, neighborhood aesthetic commander and self-appointed guardian of lawn harmony, was a 5-foot hurricane in orthopedic sandals who enforced rules with the passion of a DMV clerk on a power trip. Her favorite catchphrase, visual disruption is not permitted. I should have known right then I was about to be put on a spiritual water diet. It started with the hedge, not a jungle, not an Amazon rainforest, just a normal, responsible grown man hedge. I trimmed it, I shaped it, I even whispered words of encouragement when I watered it. But to Barbara, it was an act of botanical rebellion. The hedge ran along the utility easement where my water line connected from the street to my house. I knew this because, well, I've spent 20 years designing municipal water systems. But to Barbara, my credentials meant nothing. She once told me, personal experience does not override community guidelines. Which is HOA code for, you can have a PhD in plumbing, but I have a clipboard. Then came Tuesday. The sound of a backhoe in your front yard is not the kind of noise that pairs well with morning coffee, I stepped out to find 3 guys digging up my lawn like they were looking for pirate treasure. One of them, chewing gum with Olympic confidence, looked up and said, "Sorry man. HOA said your water line needs rerouting." Something about hedge interference. Behind them stood Barbara, arms crossed, sunglasses bigger than her ego, holding a folder labeled, Emergency Compliance Protocol. I asked her what in the holy hydration was going on. She smiled like she'd just won a coupon for eternal power and said, "Wire ensuring the utility easement remains accessible for community stability." I blinked. She spoke like she learned English from a rule book and a threat. By noon, the crew had torn through my front yard, cut off my water supply, and rerouted the main line in a way that would make any licensed technician cry into their toolkit. Pipes were now sticking out of the lawn like angry copper worms. My flower bed looked like a plumbing war zone, and when I turned on the kitchen faucet, nothing, not a drip, not a wheeze, just silence. Barbara, still watching from the sidewalk like a smug fire marshal, waved and said, "Temporary disruption builds long-term order," which is Choake speak for I broke your stuff but it was for your own good. I stood there in the ruins of my front yard, waterless, powerless, and trying to remember if I had moved into a suburban neighborhood or a Soviet water experiment. I was wetting a toothbrush with bottled water and a bad attitude when I realized something. This wasn't about a hedge. This wasn't even about rules. This was about control. Barbara didn't see water as a basic necessity. She saw it as a privilege, and she had just declared herself queen of the faucet. Curious what happens when someone tells a water engineer he's using water the wrong way. You're gonna want to stick around, because next time, she doesn't just make up rules. She creates a water usage schedule. For my toothbrush, Barbara once fined a neighbor for aggressive sprinkling. The man had a broken sprinkler head that sprayed like a Vegas fountain, and she treated it like he'd fired a super soaker at her tax forms. That was my first clue this woman didn't just enforce rules. She invented wars where peace once lived. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. A full-blown plumbing crackdown launched in the name of community fluid discipline. It was like living under a dictator who carried measuring cups and a clipboard instead of a uniform. A week after she destroyed my front yard, I got a letter hand-delivered by a trembling HOA volunteer named Janice. Poor woman looked like she'd been threatened with exile if she didn't comply. The notice accused me of deliberate obstruction of flow alignment, which sounds like something you'd get charged with in federal water court. According to the document, my yard was creating irregularities in neighborhood hydration metrics. I hadn't touched a pipe since her hit squad came through with shovels and blind confidence. But somehow, I was now the cause of everyone's plumbing anxiety. Then, like a dictator with a flair for drama, Barbara unveiled a brand new rule. Overnight, unvoted, unhinged, to promote equitable consumption, she declared in the newsletter, All residents are now limited to 15 minutes of water use per day. You read that right, 15 minutes. Total, showers, toilets, dishes, hydration. All to be timed like we were in a prison with plumbing. She even signed the bulletin as Moisture Jar, as if that title belonged anywhere outside of a parody cartoon. My neighbors whispered, but nobody acted. Most had mortgages and Wi-Fi and didn't want to risk losing either. I tested the theory. Brushed my teeth for 4 minutes, got a warning. Ran the dishwasher during a second load, another violation. I called to dispute it and Barbara's assistant told me, we use sound-based sensors to detect overuse. So now the HOA had microphones in our pipes. What's next? Thermal scans of our bathtubs. I gave up and bought a camping shower, strung it up in my bathroom, and stood there every night like a soldier bathing behind enemy lines. If irony had a scent, it was me, cold, soapy, and legally restricted. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about conservation. It wasn't even about rules. This was a woman so obsessed with control, she couldn't stand the idea of a faucet flowing without her blessing. And when people confuse power with purpose, the entire community ends up with dry mouths and wet bills. That was the lesson. Unchecked authority doesn't just inconvenience people. It quietly trains them to accept absurdity as normal. And I wasn't about to sip that Kool-Aid quietly. Think that's bad? Wait till Barbara holds a public meeting with a laser pointer, a weather chart, and a pie graph titled, Evaporation Vis. Apathy. You'll want popcorn for this. Barbara opened the meeting by saluting a wind chime. I should have walked out then. But hope's a tricky thing. It makes you believe you can reason with people who use birdhouses as surveillance points. I walked into that HOA meeting thinking I could appeal to logic, maybe present a few documents and get my water turned back on. Instead, I stepped into what can only be described as a cult meeting with a PowerPoint addiction and a woman who thought she was the Dalai Lama of landscaping. There were 30 residents seated like jurors trapped in a gardening seminar. Barbara stood at the front like a game show host who'd swallowed a rulebook and never recovered. She tapped the projector screen with a laser pointer and said, "We begin tonight's session with a reflection on environmental harmony." A photo of my front yard appeared, satellite view, no less, with a bright red arrow pointing to my hedge like it was a missile silo. "This," she announced, "is the source of flow contamination and visual misalignment. It is visible from space." I nearly choked. My hedge isn't visible from the sidewalk unless you're squatting like a crime scene investigator. As she clicked through slides of rainfall charts and neighborhood sprinkler graphs, I realized something chilling. She wasn't just trying to regulate water. She was trying to rewrite physics, according to Barbara. Water wasn't just a natural resource. It was a non-renewable emotional reservoir, and my usage was draining the spiritual capacity of the coal, DSAC. That sentence actually got a round of applause from a man who once asked me how to reset his woofully. My neighbors had become hydration zombies, nodding along while Barbara monologued like she was testifying before the United Nations. I raised my hand to speak, expecting at least a crumb of adult conversation. Barbara, who exactly approved the contractor for this waterline reroute, I never got a work order, permit, nothing. She didn't even blink. That is an internal synergy alignment, not a resident level concern. What? That's not an answer. That's what someone says when they've run out of lies and started using buzzwords like they're pepper sprayed. I tried to respond, but she waved a hand in my face and declared, "You are disrupting community liquidity equilibrium." Folks, I was now a threat to liquidity. I was a human drought. Here's the mini lesson I learned in that silent room full of nodding heads. You don't win battles like this with facts. You win by showing up with someone who won't flinch when the absurd starts talking in capital letters. The louder the nonsense gets, the more important it is to have backup that doesn't blink when they hear words like synergy and hydration crisis. Next time, I wouldn't walk into that room alone. Next time, I'd bring someone with a better laser pointer and a copy of the law. What if I told you Barbara's contractor was actually her nephew, and his business is headquartered behind a donut shop? Let's connect those dots, shall we? Civic Flow Solutions sounded fancy, until we realized it was just a P.O. box and a Gmail account. I've seen more legitimate operations run out of a high school janitor's closet. The invoices were padded like Barbara's resume, and the language was so vague it could have been copied from a BuzzFeed astrology quiz. Strategic Hydration Alignment, Moisture Equilibrium Consulting, and my personal favorite, Community Fluid Optimization Initiative, all billed at $60,000 in a year to our OA. For that price, I expected gold-plated pipes and a choir of plumbers singing hymns while adjusting water pressure. I knew I needed backup. That's when I called Trisha Bell, an ex-city audit consultant with a caffeine dependency, and a personal grudge against fraudulent nonprofits. She once shut down an entire fake animal rescue that turned out to be 3 ferrets in a tax dodge. Trisha lived for paperwork the way Barbara lived for bylaws. I handed her a stack of Civic Flow invoices, and she sipped her triple espresso and muttered, "These look like they were typed by someone who just discovered Microsoft Word." She was in. 10 minutes later, we were knee-deep in public records and HOA bylaws so dry they made sawdust seem juicy. Trisha dug like a woman possessed. She found that Civic Flow Solutions had no staff, no office, no licenses, just a UPS box behind a donut shop and a registration tied to one Todd Schulz. Yes, that Schulz, Barbara's nephew. A man whose last known profession was selling discount mattresses and who once tried to trademark the phrase, nap equity. His LinkedIn profile said, infrastructure strategist, which we later found out meant, I googled drainage. That's who was raking in HOA money under the sacred banner of pipe maintenance. Then came the kicker. Every time Barbara passed a new rule, whether it was a 15-minute water limit or a fine for aggressive faucet behavior, it was followed by a payment to Civic Flow. Every policy, every excuse, every fake inspection was just a smoke signal for another round of embezzlement. Barbara was running a suburban pyramid scheme with garden hoses and clipboards. She wasn't protecting property values. She was monetizing paranoia, and we had the paper trail to prove it. Here's what I finally understood in HOA land. The most outrageous rules aren't made to help you. They're made to hide what someone else is helping themselves to. That's the real game. Make you scared enough to follow nonsense. And they'll cash checks while you boil water in a camping kettle. And once I saw the scam behind the sprinkler talk, I knew exactly where to aim the next wrench. Ever seen a HOA president panic when you ask for receipts? Wait till we show her what happens when you own the pipes she faked fixing. They say revenge is best served cold. I served mine with a utility bill, a wrench, and a notarized acquisition agreement. While Barbara was busy staging sprinkler raids and inventing water, time curfews. I was sitting down with Mr. Lamont, the owner of High Plains Waterworks, the modest little utility company that quietly kept Maple Downs hydrated while Barbara loudly claimed credit. Lamont looked like the kind of man who once wrestled gators or cable contracts. When I told him I wanted to buy the company, he nearly cried from relief and caffeine withdrawal. Turns out, he'd been dealing with Barbara's weekly complaint letters for years. Claims like, pipe vibration disturbs my meditation practice, and water pressure caused emotional turbulence during yoga. The man was ready to retire and hand the wrench to anyone who wasn't using it as a microphone. But he didn't want a corporate buyout. He wanted someone who cared about infrastructure, not spreadsheets. So he gave me a test. Not a financial one, a pressure test. You've got 5 minutes. Show me where the system's weakest points are. No software, just eyes. It felt like a plumbing site, and I passed with flying rust. The deal closed under the radar. I didn't even tell Trisha until the ink was dry. We filed everything through a trust, wrapped it in regulatory paperwork. And made sure the HOA board had no idea the man they tried to fine for faucet turbulence now controlled the actual water flow. For once, I didn't want a victory dance. I wanted silence. Strategic silence, the kind that bubbles just beneath the surface before turning into a geyser. I didn't just buy a company. I bought leverage measured in PSI and poetic justice. Barbara found out the following Tuesday. She marched over in platform wedges in indignation, waving a flyer in one hand and a garden hose in the other like they were constitutional amendments. This is plumbing monopolization! This violates our neighborhood's core values! I took a long sip of coffee and smiled. You're free to switch to dehydration. That shut her up faster than a burst main in winter. Her face went through 5 stages of grief in 30 seconds. Denial, anger, conspiracy, throat clearing, and finally, HOA reboot mode. Don't start a turf war with someone who owns the turf and the water under it. You can bully a neighbor. You can fake a newsletter. But you can't yell your way out of a shut-off notice. I didn't need revenge, I had regulation. And it came with a meter, a margin, and a mute button shaped like a valve. Oh, but Barbara doesn't go quietly. No, she prints propaganda and compares me to Nestle. Want to see how the community reacted? I knew Barbara was spiraling when she compared my water company to the East India Trading Co. The woman handed out flyers like she was running for paranoid prom queen. And my personal favorite, she stapled them to trees, taped them to mailboxes, and even tried to hand one to a plumber mid-job. He asked if it came with a coupon for sanity. It didn't. She went door to door, whispering over hedges like a conspiracy-themed Avon rep, is going to start charging for air next. Oxygen permits are coming, you'll see. It was less of a smear campaign and more of a community theater production titled Fear and Faucets. Me neighbors who once waved from their porches now ducked behind shrubs like I was the CEO of Thirst. My social stock plummeted faster than Barbara's understanding of economics. Me. One woman crossed the street just to avoid making eye contact with my hose reel. But I didn't retaliate. I didn't argue, post rebuttals, or staple counter flyers to her birdbath. No, me. I audited every single Civic Flow Solutions project ever billed to our HOA. If Barbara wanted drama, I'd bring spreadsheets to the theater. Trisha and I pulled invoices so padded they could have cushioned a trampoline park. Me. Moisture meditation chamber installation, emotional pressure stabilization, and pipe vibration mindfulness retrofit, all fake and all paid. The more we dug, the more it stank like mildew and middle management fraud. The final straw, one entry build LR12 500 for residential flow chakra mapping. No permits, no contractors, no actual plumbing, just vibes and theft altogether. Barbara and her mattress selling nephew had funneled over 150,000 in fake fixes, most of it charged during her so-called water awareness campaign. That's not community service. That's community embezzlement with a scented signature. So here's the real lesson loud and clear. If someone's coming for your name, you don't scream, you publish. Because truth doesn't shout, it leaks. Then it floods. And when you've got the receipts, suddenly the loudest person in the room becomes the wettest. Ever seen a community flip faster than a shower knob? Because I'm about to publish something that'll make HOA propaganda look like finger painting. Me. Barbara once said Civic Flow Solutions saved the neighborhood. Turns out they couldn't even fix a hose without duct tape and prayer. I dropped a 40-page report on every doorstep in Maple Downs like it was holiday mail from the IRS. Inside, photographs of botched plumbing, fake work orders, redacted permit requests that read like fortune cookies, me, and a bonus back page titled Nepotism Bingo. Spoiler alert, if your card had mattress nephew, no office address, or Wotwike vibration mapping, you won. By noon, the HOA message board looked like someone had tasered a beehive made of receipts, me. Neighbors who once bought Barbara's spiritual irrigation talk were now flooding her inbox with refund requests and veiled threats to call Channel 9. Gary from 3 houses down, me who used to think HOA stood for Hot Dogs on August, announced a recall vote faster than Barbara could schedule a mandatory gratitude circle. When she tried to stall it by calling an emergency leaf committee meeting, even her garden gnome looked skeptical. Me. That night, the HOA board bailed like rats off a sinking yacht made of mulch and passive aggression. Barbara, still clinging to her clipboard, me, gave a farewell speech about hydration trauma and the energetic burden of compliance. It was met with the kind of silence reserved for bad karaoke and overcooked turkey. Then Gary took the mic, me, motioned for an immediate vote, and the room clapped like we'd just legalized front yard hammocks. Barbara muttered, "This is the collapse of order," and someone whispered, "No, me. It's the collapse of your nephew's tax shelter." After the vote, I rolled out a new billing model based on actual plumbing conditions. If your pipes were legit, your bill went down. If you had the Civic Flow special, duct-taped elbows and PVC from 1997, you paid for the extra risk. No drama, just math. Barbara opened her bill, blinked twice, and shouted, "Me, Tutor 64 plus non-compliance adjustment." I just said, "Water remembers." She looked like someone who'd just been served by her own sprinkler. Funny how things clear up once the facts hit the pavement. Me, turns out, when you stop arguing with noise and start showing people what's really underneath, the truth has a way of settling in. Quiet, steady, and impossible to mop up. Think it's over? Not yet, me. Guess who's about to get indicted for funneling HOA cash into a dog grooming startup run by her niece? Barbara used to fine people for hanging wind chimes. Now she's sweeping leaves behind the community center in a neon vest that says Civic Accountability Volunteer. Poetic, really, me. She once wrote a 9-page citation for unauthorized decorative twirling. Now she's chasing trash in a windstorm like it owes her money. Turns out embezzlement, document forgery. Me, and weaponizing irrigation codes carry real consequences once the local DA stops laughing long enough to press charges. The court gave her the HOA equivalent of exiled 200 hours of community service. Me. A restitution plan that'll outlive her nail polish collection, and a formal ban from ever holding office in a residential association again. Her nephew Todd. Blacklisted from every contractor database in the state. Rumor has it he's trying to reinvent himself as a holistic landscape interpreter. Good luck selling that to anyone not wearing sage and sandals. Me, his old business address, the UPS box behind the donut shop, is now rented by a real dog groomer with more business licenses than he ever had invoices. Meanwhile, I rolled out what the board now calls the Plumber's Peace Plan. Transparent billing, infrastructure audits twice a year, and zero HOA interference with public utilities. Water rates dropped, Me maintenance requests got handled in under 48 hours, and no one has used the word chakra in a pipe inspection since. My mailbox stopped hissing, my faucets hum like jazz, and the best part, people actually trust the system again, because it works like it's supposed to, not like Barbara's mood calendar. Her final water bill came in at $7.93, complete with a polite cover letter and a surprise line item at the bottom: Karen recovery fee $17.50. Just a little reminder that while she was busy reinventing herself as a suburban dictator, the rest of us were reading the fine print. When she called to complain, I said, "Barbara, you're welcome to challenge the charges," with a hose and a stopwatch. She hung up faster than Civic Flow dissolved under audit. Now I host a podcast called Pressure Points Tales from the OA Underground. Me first guest, Gary, with the leak and the 20-page spreadsheet of every petty fine ever filed. We laughed, we cried, we read bylaws out loud. The reviews are in 5 stars from retired engineers, plumbers, and one woman who fought her HOA over the height of a flamingo statue. Turns out justice doesn't just trickle, it gets downloaded. And that's how a quiet plumber with a hedge and a backbone outmaneuvered the most decorated water tyrant in HOA history. I didn't scream. I didn't vandalize. I didn't even break a rule. I just rid them better. I fought paperwork with paperwork, fraud with facts, and turned a shut-off notice into a system overhaul. Barbara tried to rule by fear. I rebuilt the kingdom with fairness, flow rate, and a binder clip. Now when folks turn on their faucets in Maple Downs, they're not just getting water. They're getting proof that one person with the right mix of patience, skill, and righteous petness can change how power flows, literally. Because here's the thing, this wasn't just a fight over plumbing. It was about dignity, about knowing your worth, standing your ground, and refusing to let bullies and clipboards rewrite the rules of your home. We don't win by yelling louder. We win by knowing where the valves are and when to turn them. If this story reminded you of your own HOA horror story, or just gave you a reason to laugh while folding laundry, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Drop a comment about the wildest thing your HOA ever tried to pull, and subscribe so you don't miss the next tale from the underground world of community chaos. Because if there's one thing Barbara taught us, it's this: always be kind, but never be unarmed, especially when the weapon is water pressure.